The Imitation Nation podcast covers all things counterfeit, hosted by Shabir and Versaftar of the Partnership for Safe Medicines and Sven Bergman of Venture Global. All statements are their own and not the opinions of their employers. All right, Sven, how the heck are you?
I am fantastic. You know, it's the big rush by everybody towards getting ready for the holiday and pushing a bunch of projects kind of to the finish line here and getting ready for some R&R when we hit the weekend. So, but fantastic.
I appreciate your Batman Christmas sweater.
I know, right? And it's fully licensed, so this is legitimate since we making sure we talk about non-counterfeit. So I also have a very nice Star Wars one, which I might rock on another conference call this week. So,
well, my week's going well. I've got all children are at home, which is nice. Nice. Which means I get woken up in the morning by an hour or so of classical piano from my elder practicing. And as you know, my drama for the week is that the bottle of whiskey I sent you as a gift is not delivering correctly.
Outrageous. Telling you.
Yeah.
Known as first world problems, but yes. I appreciate it. I appreciate the effort.
Well, what do we have in the news this week?
You know, it was funny when you and I were kind of preparing for it. There's so much going on that we kind of have to pare it down. But like one of the things that struck me that I saw, so in Houston, there was a woman that was arrested for performing unlicensed cosmetic procedures, specifically lip injections. Right, that's a big market these days. But she did that without a license and with non-FDA approved and counterfeit products. Right, so. The interesting thing here really was that it didn't used to be the case that you had victims coming forward, right? But in this case, you actually had a victim that informed law enforcement, hey, something was injected in me that's wrong. And I'm really excited about that because that shows us how important these tip lines are, not just for law enforcement, but also for pharmaceutical companies to have those, to have identified these scams. So that was very unique.
I was interested by this story as well, both for the fact that there were six or seven additional victims that came forward,
yeah,
and that this woman, which is not unusual, but doing cosmetic injections when you're unlicensed, I think a lot of people don't think that that's important, but it is important, and. The idea that she was just ordering them from random places around the world and then putting them into people's bodies. I still find it shocking that that's not a weird line for people to cross, but they do in fact cross it.
Yeah. You know, I see so many of these, I would say ads everywhere, right? They're on billboards. They are as you drive through town where folks will focus on, you know, a Botox or a lip filler and really will advertise that very low price of an injection. And in all likelihood, it's either going to be diluted, like that's a best case scenario. It's going to be counterfeit. It's going to be something that has nothing to do with it. There is no shortcut for getting a pharmaceutical cheaper, right? So, and it's really concerning. It is very prevalent. And so as I said, I'm very excited that victims actually call law enforcement, and more importantly, that law enforcement acted on it. So I think that was a good story there. Let's see how the prosecution moves forward.
Yeah, I can't imagine being able to mount a defense as to why you're not licensed. That's not a great one.
It's not an easy one to justify. Yes, I think the piece here will be like, does she have priors, and what will the judge do? But the good thing is, especially as these things, and there was a great news story on it, right? As these become more public, I hope the public becomes more aware that is not how you should look for medical procedures, pharmaceuticals, where you start to Google for things and you're like, oh, wow, that's really cheap. It always ends up in the wrong alley, right?
Yeah, cheap is never really great.
Yeah. So
So
what you see
I
in the news?
noticed that you have an article coming out in Authentication and Brand News about counterfeit e-cigarettes, and this is entirely foreign to me. I've never worked in that end of the anti-counterfeiting world. I've stuck to medicine. But
Yeah.
so tell us what that article's about.
So, the article is really interesting. So, what I actually focused on is it's a wild story. So, the market of e-vapor products in the United States, or e-cigarettes, is to a large degree illicit at this point, which really has to do with the fact that in the beginning, FDA banned, rightfully so, kid-friendly flavors, but it was filled immediately by illicit actors. All of these products come in from China. And so the estimate right now is that the market is roughly somewhere in the range of 80 to 85% illicit. And we're talking about a $7 billion black market in illicit products, right? Which is
Yeah.
obviously horrible for public health, horrible for our youth, so many issues with that. The article I wrote about was that because that illicit market is so large now, like it's an $8 billion market, that there were counterfeits of the illicit goods being produced. So the illicit goods are produced from China under authority by the China Tobacco Monopoly Administration. And yes, there's the word monopoly and the word administration together in China. But these products were being counterfeited by folks that were trying to undercut the illicit products flowing into the United States. So the manufacturers of the genuine illicit products or non-authorized products in the United States were putting authentication stickers, these holograms, all these authentication features on their genuine products to distinguish them from the counterfeits coming in. And I wrote an article that was focusing on the illicit market, but also was a call to any security provider to say, hey, if you're providing these stamps, which we discussed in the last time when we discussed wine or other features, have a really, really, really important task to make sure consumers know they get the authentic product, that they also have a responsibility to make sure that those stickers are applied to product that is legal in the market in which it's sold. And so
Yeah.
that there's a responsibility for them to not just apply this to anything. And so my article really was a call for security providers to add additional steps in to make sure that when you apply something that now gives the idea to consumers that this is a genuine, authentic, authorized product, that really should ideally follow the laws of the country. And this was not just in the US. These are also applied in the UK, same issue in the UK. So this is really a global thing. And so that's what I wrote about. And yes, you don't know anything about it. I don't use these products either, but I just found it fascinating that an illicit market got so big that the illicits had counterfeits. And
This reminds me of during the pandemic, and I'm gonna stand up and just tired of sitting. During the pandemic, I don't know if you remember this, but one of the greatest photos that happened during the pandemic was a photo of some counterfeit N95 masks. And it was great because they had a picture of the real box of masks, and they had a picture of the fake box, and the fake box had a hologram sticker.
That's right.
And the real box doesn't have a hologram sticker. So these guys went out and bought themselves hologram stickers in order to make themselves look more legitimate. And a lot of people would look at that and be like, "Oh yeah, that's got a hologram sticker. That's got to be legitimate."
Yes, in all of the weirdness of the pandemic, that press release from 3M saying, by the way, our genuine masks do not have a holographic authentication feature on them was, it was something. But, that's what they do. And again, it comes down to most of counterfeits are produced in China. Most of these authentication labels are also produced in China and can easily be, and that's what we always talk about, they can be replicated, right? It's not that hard to make a holographic sticker and make it look real. And so it's a really interesting kind of world and I think you and I always get surprised thinking like a criminal where like think of this way. And I know you and I always joke about it where like when we hear what they're doing, we're like, what? That's the first reaction. And then our second reaction is, of course they do. Because, if you take the limitations of ethics and harm and all of those things away, you're like, yeah, if I just go for pure profit motive, yeah, of course that's what I do. So,
yeah. I had friends who were healthcare workers at that time, and I was like, oh my god, like I would, It would be heartbreaking for me to find out that you got COVID at work because of a counterfeit mask. Ugh. What else do we have in the news?
Well, speaking of somebody else who is taking advantage of selling things that they shouldn't be selling to other folks unlicensed. So in Medina, Tennessee, a woman was accused and charged with selling black market weight loss drugs, right? So the West Tennessee Violent Crime and Drug Task Force said they seized about 698 vials of semaglutide, tirzepatide, and conglitazide, and I might be mispronouncing this. And so what did you read there? What all happened there?
So I'm actually really fascinated by this. My staff knows that I have a couple of things that really fascinate me. One of them is how every pill press operation likely has an orange Home Depot bucket that they use to catch the fake pills in. And when I say why, one of my staffers is always like, "It's a quality bucket at a good price." The other thing I'm fascinated by is when a medicine that has not been through FDA approval appears in the black market from counterfeiters being sold to patients. And that's conglitazide. So there's a new product coming out. I think it's from Novo called, people are calling it CagriSema, but I believe it's conglitazide and semaglutide. It's like an equal amount of each. And there's a lot of people who have experience with semaglutide who are like, I cannot wait for this new combination therapy. It's not through trials. It's not got FDA approval yet. But much like the tirzepatide, which is Lilly's product, it was for sale on the black market before it was before it was FDA approved.
That's crazy.
This story is great. I spent a lot of time looking at it. There was first a raid on the home of the woman accused of this crime, and she's only been arrested and accused. She hasn't actually been through the prosecution process. And they seized a bunch of compounded medicine vials, and they found that they were for research only, not for human consumption. That's on the label, right?
Okay.
And then they figured out that she was supplying to nearby med spas. And then they went to each of these med spas, and then they conducted a search and seizure there. The med spas in question, the news says, are cooperating. And then the task force promptly set up a hotline, for victims to call. And I hope they do. I hope they reach out to her. Because even if you didn't get hurt, if you injected yourself with something that was told to be something else, or that, was told to be for human consumption that was not, I think, even if you didn't fall over dead, you've been harmed. Like the crime has still occurred, even if you're not hurt. And she was charged with impersonating a licensed professional, right? She did not have a wholesaler's pharmaceutical distribution license or a pharmacy license. Reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon. I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe she was wearing a firearm and talked about it in a threatening way or something. Criminal simulation, which is not a charge that I've seen before. Selling a legend drug, and then money laundering. Money laundering, you do have to do something to get a charge of money laundering, but you often mostly just have to try and hide the gains.
That's right.
This is really fascinating. I would say we've been following this at PSM obviously for a long time, and there's 3 big supply chain safety dangers that happen right now in the weight loss and or should say obesity and diabetes injectable space. There's lookalike counterfeits, right? Those are often insulin pens rewrapped to look like Ozempic or the tirzepatide, products. There's legally compounded medicines that sometimes have quality and safety issues. Not always. Sometimes they're fine. And then there's illegally compounded medicines that are way unsafe. And I would say this is in that area. I mean, this is not these, people don't think about it, but there's medicines that are made for like lab testing and experimentation, and they're not clean enough to be injected into humans. And then there's stuff that's made that's pharmaceutical grade. And, the lab stuff, it's not meant for humans. It's a lot cheaper because the quality is lower. But there's a reason that it's for research purposes only. It doesn't mean you can't sell it to humans.
No, absolutely. selling those, actual pharmaceuticals as research chemicals is a way criminals often try to avoid criminal liability for selling these medicines without a wholesale or pharmacy license. And it's wildly illegal. It just is to sell these to people. And especially if you know that they will inject it into patients or resell it. And there's a lot of legal liability that comes with that. Well, you and I have discussed this before. This is not the first time we have seen products being sold as research chemicals, right?
Yeah.
We see this on marketplaces for controlled substances. We've seen this for a variety of other ones where they are sold for research only. And you're like, you're not selling this for research. And part of it is trying to avoid investigation, right? Part of it is trying to avoid or try to comply with the platform's guidelines of like, you can only sell research chemicals. So it's just a way for them to try to get around it. And it's obviously highly irresponsible.
I don't understand how you get away with selling something that is for research purposes only and then talk about its weight loss potential. Right? If it's for research, how are you going to lose any weight? With it just sitting there? Is it just going to dissuade you from eating more and convince you to exercise more or something by just sitting there on your shelf?
I guess the person thought that, putting it into random human trial of some people that she contacted on the internet counts as research. I don't know. Again, this will be a tough one to explain to the judge how that was for research only. So
this was done by the Violent Crime and Drug Unit of 2 counties. I think it was actually a 2-county investigation. Is that a weird thing or a normal thing?
So it's very unusual. And actually interesting thing is when you said that before, the fact that the Violent Crime Unit was doing the investigation sparked my interest. So I looked at their full press conference. And you asked before that, there was a charge of using a deadly weapon. The way they defined it is they said, because this was being used with a fake drug and that fake drug could harm somebody, that therefore they consider that a violent crime. So the use of the drug is considered the weapon in this case, I believe. So it's very interesting that a violent task force would do this. It's fantastic that they do this because they have wonderful agents and very broad-reaching authorities. And so, yes, but it was highly unusual for that unit to take it.
I mean, they're violent crime and drugs, right? So technically this is a drug crime. I mean, that part would have been easy for me if someone was like, why are you guys investigating this? Well, it's a drug crime. Not every drug is like heroin. Sometimes we investigate other drugs.
And that's exactly how they defined it. That's exactly how they defined it. They're like, while this is not fully a controlled substance, it's still controlled, and therefore we decided this falls in our domain. I think it's terrific that once again they took the calls of concerned folks in, because the way they learned about it, right, was that again, folks that bought this found it weird that they were picking their purchases up on the person's front porch, right? Like stuff you buy on Etsy or on some, community neighborhood website.
And they're like, marketplace for semaglutide.
Right. Like, this is weird. This doesn't seem like real. And so they called the cops. They're like, hey, this seems strange. So again, kudos to law enforcement for acting on it. Kudos for folks to report it. I think we need way more of these report hotlines. And hopefully, again, as we said in the first story, folks will wake up to the fact that if it looks weird, it probably is weird and most likely illegal.
I would say that it's really good that law enforcement task forces that are working on drug crimes are learning more about therapeutic medicine crime, right? When they learned about pill presses, that wasn't just great for catching people making fake oxys. Mm-hmm. That's also great for people making like fake Lipitor.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited if this is a trend and it continues. But I have one big question.
Tell me.
Did she relabel the vials? Like they when they seized them, they found them for research use only. What were the med spas buying vials to inject into patients that said not for human consumption and then injecting them or selling them to patients who they knew were injecting them?
I don't have that answer. So that is an excellent question. I I would hope that as a consumer, if they weren't relabeled and somebody's trying to inject you with something that says not for human consumption, that's a big red flag, and you say, hey, maybe not. I don't know if it was relabeled. I have no idea. So, do you know? Did you see it?
I think that they were not relabeled. If you read the story, because when they seized them, that's what they said. They said that they were not for human consumption, which means that one or more staff at the med spas handled these things that said not for human consumptions and injected them anyway. And I can't believe, I mean, I'm just paranoid because of the work I do in counterfeit medicine, but I insist on seeing the bottle every time I get an injection. I do not let someone come at me with a naked full syringe and just stick it in my arm.
100%. You know, when I had a hospital stay a couple of years ago, and I remember they were injecting me with a variety of things, I was always very comforted when the nurse, the first thing she did, she got the vial, she had a scanner, she scanned it, that scanned it into the system, verified it. Like I saw her authenticating the drug, literally like, yep, that's what I was supposed to pull from inventory. It bounces against whatever it bounces. That feels way better than somebody rummaging through a, Home Depot bucket or some cardboard box and pulling something out that has a label on it saying not for human consumption. So part of it is just consumer vigilance. People gotta stay vigilant on these issues.
Yeah, my daughter's on a new medicine that is an injectable, and I save all of the Drug Supply Chain Security Act
of course you do.
Parts of the box. So I have the serial number of everything that's gone into her arm since she started on this. And my wife was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "You know what I'm doing."
You know what I'm doing.
For years, I'm going to hang on to these barcodes just to make sure that if there's a problem, I can tell you exactly what box of injectables she got. I actually I saw this story and I wanted us to talk about it because we actually know a number of the people involved, and it's actually something pretty close to my heart. So PSM has, of course, worked with family members who have lost family members to fake pills for years. The first one I met, the two sons of these two moms died in 2015. And these pills, in some cases, these pills are marketed through Snapchat. And so a number of families who had family members killed by a drug dealer, their child in most cases met through Snapchat, sued Snapchat. And they filed the suit, and then Snapchat moved to dismiss. And when they didn't like the court's answer, they appealed it. And the appeals court has just dismissed that case. It was filed originally in 2022, which is a long time ago, by over 60 families, including one of my friends, Amy Neville, whose 13-year-old son, Alexander Neville, was killed by a fake pill from a Snapchat drug dealer. And I guess now that they satisfied the motion to dismiss and they're going to proceed, they'll go on to discovery. And I'm actually really curious to see, because we tracked a lot of deaths that were drug dealers operating on Snapchat, and it seemed like it took a while before Snapchat acted. So I'm curious to see what Snapchat knew when by looking at the emails that'll come out in discovery.
Yeah, no, it is. As you know, I met Amy as well, and you and I are working on these issues quite a bit. There's nothing more heartbreaking than meeting any of the families we work with. Every single time I hear Amy's story or any of the other families we work with, their stories of how they lost a loved one or a child, it chokes me up every single time. It doesn't matter how often I've heard the story. I immediately think of my children, and it is beyond heartbreaking. And so, for me, any participant in this, and this is not, just single to Snapchat, any participant that is putting kind of a blind eye to this or putting a half-hearted effort against this, for me, needs to be held accountable. And, one of the ways that I know Congress is, for example, doing this, there's multiple bills in Congress that have attempted and are attempting to provide some form of legal liability or responsibility or reporting responsibility to social media companies and other platforms that either facilitate or put a blind eye to sale of these counterfeit pills there. A lot of those bills will sunset because they didn't get passed in this Congress. And we look forward to see them reintroduced in the 119th in January. And we will hope that, some of these will get additional movement forward. This lawsuit certainly is a great indicator that I think society at large continues to look at this and say, this is simply unacceptable.
Yeah, I think my favorite of these, and PSM has endorsed it, and I've spent a lot of time talking to Hill staff about it, but is the Cooper Davis Devin Noring Act. And It was originally called the Cooper Davis Act, but when it got its House introduction, Devin Noring was added to it, who's another victim, as is Cooper Davis. And I like it because it's not some sort of weird, broad liability. It's actually pretty straightforward. If you are a platform like Snapchat and you either find relatively significant evidence that someone is using their Snapchat account to deal drugs, like pictures and pictures of pills over and over again, and an email trail or a message trail on the platform, where people are like, let's move this conversation to Telegram. That person's probably dealing drugs. If a user reports that to you, which a lot of parents do, they troll social media hoping to find a drug dealer to report so that they can keep this from happening to somebody else. Your liability is absolved as a platform if you hand it to the DEA.
Correct.
That's not hard. That's not like you have to get them off your platform or you have to look for them. Like the proposed law doesn't require that you look for the drug dealers on your platform. It's if you come across it, especially from a user report, and you hand it to a responsible adult, which apparently you are not as a platform, then you are not liable for the fact that that person may sell a drug that kills somebody, after marketing it through your platform. I love that, right? It's a very clear understanding of what you need to do to be a good member of society and also to protect your users from harmful behavior. And I've seen all the platforms, Facebook, Meta, and Snapchat all drag their heels on this legislation. It got through the Judiciary Committee in the Senate last year. It got introduced in the House, and I'm really hopeful that in January when it gets reintroduced, that it starts and moves through those steps, and we can actually get it into law this year or next year.
And, law enforcement, as you know, has been quite involved in this. They've worked with Amy. They also worked with Amy on her report actually on social media as she was fighting to make sure the lawsuit doesn't get dismissed. Her law enforcement friends and partners and the ones that we also work with sent some amicus briefs in to say, no, this is a real issue. Because, and I remember there was a large law enforcement meeting I was at where Snapchat presented about their procedures that at the time they had in place, and I don't know if they revised it since, where their procedure was if they were notified by somebody or law enforcement that they're looking at an account as potentially a drug dealer, Snapchat's policy was, because they were concerned about the privacy of their user, to notify the user that there's a law enforcement request, and then gave the user 7 days to respond before they responded to law enforcement. That was their policy at the time. And I was in a room when that was made public to law enforcement, and they weren't too excited about it because that is kind of giving the criminal the heads up that the cops are on your tail. And so, to your point, I am very supportive and I hope, well, first of all, I want to see where this lawsuit goes. I hope that there's legislation that helps legislate it. But most importantly, and this is a sincere personal belief of mine, I wish we wouldn't need legislation for this, because what's being discussed here, none of this is anything that's anything but common sense. If somebody or law enforcement or a consumer says, hey, I think that person is a drug dealer, what you want to do is retain the records, don't give the person a tip, and report it to law enforcement so they can investigate it. That seems pretty simple, right? We're not talking about anything that is censorship or, dragnet operations of searching for content or any of that. It is, you get a report that there's an illegal activity, you look at it yourself and you report it to law enforcement. That's all that is asking for. Now, I personally don't think we should need legislation for that, But obviously we need legislation for that because they're not voluntarily doing it. So I hope that the industry wakes up to it and says, nope, we actually need to just do the right thing right away versus being legislated into it, but or being sued into it. So we'll see where this goes, because this issue continues to be there. You continue to keep tracking these cases.
Yeah, during the reason that I'm so curious to see what comes out of Snapchat and Discovery, if they haven't destroyed it all, is that we tracked deaths to 38 states. Mm-hmm. We tracked people who'd met their drug dealer on Snapchat and then been sold a pill and died to 38 different states over the course of like 2 to 3 years. And there's I'm just sort of shocked as a parent of teenagers that they continued to have growth of their platform without feeling like they had to actually call it all hands code red on this situation. Or if they did, that they were so incompetent that they managed to not actually address the issue in a sufficient method. And my guess, I don't know anything about the internal workings at Snapchat. Maybe their lawyers told them that because of, Section 230, they'll never be held liable no matter what kind of harm happens off the platform. But, for people like Amy and her family, I just think they deserve more honesty than that. And they deserve better answers than what Snapchat's given. And I will say, this is a pretty typical technique, but I watched as the Cooper Davis, Devin Noring legislation moved its way through Congress. I watched the platforms do this standard Washington corporate attitude where in public they said that they thought that they were supportive of it in some form in public, and then privately they were killing it. And to the point where, like, at one point one of the platforms, I won't say which one, was running ads in Republican, predominantly GOP voter states saying that legislation would suppress conservative journalism. And I was like, there is you must have a real lack of critical thinking to be able to believe the crap that is in that ad, that TV ad. But they were paying for TV ads, this platform was. And I was shocked. I guess maybe that's not the right word. I was not shocked. I was extremely disappointed in a vociferous way. And I think I may have thrown something foam in my office when I heard that.
The one of the best advices I got early on in my career was from a boss where he says, whatever you do, always take a look and say, if what you are doing right now would become a front page news article in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, would that still look good? Right. And for me, it just comes down to this. And I think a lot of companies, platforms, etc., many the ones we discuss in these cases, where if you just take this rule of like, is what you're doing something that if you just see it on the front page of the New York Times looks good? If the answer is no, do something different, right? And we covered the stories the last time where companies actually doing the exact opposite, like Gilead as an example with their amazing HIV counterfeit investigation. Yeah, that can be on the front page of the New York Times all day long because they did everything correct. And so I think it will be important for companies going forward with all of these counterfeit medicines, counterfeit things that they're seeing that either happen to their products and or are being facilitated on platforms, whatever, to say, okay, am I doing everything that I can? And how will this look if what I'm doing or not doing becomes a cover story? And if it's not the right thing, do something different, right? So I do hope that these wonderful parents, like as Amy Neville, help foster further change, right, and accelerate that.
Yeah, I think it'll have to be. I don't know that they can do anything different. Right? There's only the truth has to come out. There has to be a material act of contrition. They've been very. I think many of the families would tell you that they have not felt like the platforms responsible for their kids' death have taken responsibility, and they're going to have to. And they can do it in court. They can do it in the legislation. somewhere they're going to have to take responsibility.
This discovery will be very interesting. There's moments like you remember, and Cooper Davis was part of that, when Mark Zuckerberg had to stand up in front of a full congressional hearing room and face the parents of kids that were lost for a variety of reasons due to things that happened on their platform, and had to apologize to those families. And that actually did, change the stance of that platform at the time. And so I think it's that. I think it's for companies to face the human side and say, what am I doing here? Is that really the right thing to do? And so, again, I hope more and more will come of that as people wake up to this and say, that's just not the right action. We gotta do better.
It's funny you say that. What I keep for inspiration in my office?
Do better.
This is a picture of Jaime Puerta holding up a picture of his son Daniel at that hearing where Mark Zuckerberg had to turn around and apologize to the parents whose families had been harmed. Daniel died from a fake pill that he bought on Snapchat.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Keeps me focused on what my real mission is here.
That's right. Social media platforms, do better. Please do better.
Yeah. Well, you got holiday plans. I think you're going to do some travel, yeah?
I'm going to do some travel. We're going to be in Europe, seeing family, and we're going to attempt to see the Northern Lights in Norway, which is going to be super exciting, and then spend some more time with family in Switzerland. And it just will hopefully be a nice and relaxing holiday break, getting us ready for what, with the new incoming 119th Congress, can I only imagine will be a fascinating and interesting 2 to 4 years of very rapid change in this country, and it'll be busy. It'll be busy.
Well, I'm staying within the boundaries of the state of California, taking my family, which now is really only together a couple months a year. Until my son starts taking summer internships, and then I'll only see him like 3 weeks a year.
Wow, that's
we're going to go ski and see if at the age of 57 I can still ski.
Of course you can.
Decently.
I heard there's good snow already up there, so I think you'll be in great shape.
Yeah, it should be good. One of the first things I learned when I came to California about 17, 18 years ago was that the size of the snowpack is a year-round discussion, because it's both the tourist industry of skiing in Tahoe and other places in California, but it's also how we bank water for the whole year. So I remember the first time I heard them talk about how many inches the snowpack had built over the winter, I was like, why is that on the radio for me? Why is that not just on ag radio? But as you know, like, we run one of the largest agricultural economies in the world. So the amount of snow is not just for fun, for skiing and snowboarding, but it's also business.
Fills up all the reservoirs, so we can have our almonds and avocados and all the other delicious things that California grows.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great holiday. I will see you in the new year, everybody. This was Imitation Nation podcast number 2. We hope to see you, and keep listening for number 3. Subscribe on our website. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
All right. Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
The Imitation Nation podcast is a production of Cause Stories and is the sole owner of this production. Podcast production by Elizabeth Rude. Podcast management by Sarah Embers Haftar. Theme music written by Jonathan Boyle.